Here's my assessment of not just the vote in Massachusetts, but the mood around the country. The same thing that swept Scott Brown into office swept me into office. People are angry and they're frustrated. Not just because of what's happened in the last year or 2 years, but what's happened over the last 8 years. Here's one thing I know, and I just want to make sure that this is off the table. The Senate certainly shouldn't try to jam anything through until Scott Brown is seated. People in Massachusetts spoke. He's got to be part of that process.
I couldn't sleep at all last night.
Welcome to the Savage Nation. I know you've been waiting for this show all day to see what I'm going to say, and the answer is, what can I say that hasn't been said already? I think it's very interesting. Play the music, all right, then we'll talk. Go ahead. It's very funny. He was tossing and turning. I'll play it, let him enjoy it. Thank you very much. It doesn't work. Let's get serious here for a minute. All right, so Obama surprised me by doing the right thing. He's very smart. Apparently, he's smarter than Nancy Lugosi, who says no matter what, we're going to force it through with my iron lame heel. Obama says here's one thing I know, and I just want to make sure that this is off the table. The Senate certainly should not try to jam anything through until Scott Brown is seated. That's a little different than they're going to force it through. They're going to do a reconciliation. I think that's very good news. It's very smart politically for Obama. It's very Machiavellian. Prince Machiavelli was read by Barack Obama in college. Prince Machiavelli, truthfully, knew what he was doing. The guy was a pretty smart guy. Maybe he didn't know as much as David Axelrod, but Prince Machiavelli was pretty good for his time. Maybe he wasn't as smart as Saul Alinsky, but Machiavelli did the best he could, and I think Obama is reading from Machiavelli's playbook, not Alinsky's playbook or Axelrod's playbook. Now, here are some of the headlines. My headline that I put on my website is landslide. You could say aftershock, because that thing I just played for you was the aftershock. It's the aftershock of the landslide. In a victory few thought possible, Republican Scott Brown defeated Democrat Martha Coakley in the race for the seat held by Ted Kennedy, a win that could grind Obama's agenda to a halt. That we all know. Brown beat Coakley in Kennedy's hometown from WBZ Boston. Why Coakley lost Ted Kennedy's Senate seat is no big mystery. New York Times says Scott Brown supports waterboarding, deporting illegals, and no cap and trade, which is where I now enter the conversation in a minute, actually. I'll come back to that. ABC News is reporting that Senator Bayh says there will be a catastrophe if their party, the Dems, ignore the lesson. Here's what Bayh said. He said, there's going to be a tendency on the part of our people to be in denial about all this, but if you lose Massachusetts and that's not a wake-up call, there's no hope of waking up. That's a very centrist Democrat who understands what's going on. Now, here's an interesting story from the New York Post that you must read. Muslim mass murderer Hassan was promoted even though he was radicalized. Hassan, Major Hassan, the cold-blooded coward who shot so many soldiers in cold blood while screaming Allah Akbar or whatever he screamed and wearing his white holy robes, was ripped by Army brass over and over again for his unprofessional behavior, his lateness, his poor judgment, his being overweight. But the same officers nevertheless gave him glowing reports and moved him up the chain of command because they were afraid of being punished by the left-wing vermin in the legal departments for having picked on him if he was a Muslim. Now, even left-wing Time asked this question. Remember, Time magazine is a far-left, out-of-the-mainstream magazine. It always has been. Now, there's a report on the Fort Hood shootings. We all know about it. But listen to what even left-wing Time magazine says. Why no mention of Islam? They said it. It says the U.S. military's just released report into the Fort Hood shootings. He spends 86 pages detailing various slip-ups by Army officers, but does not mention Islam or Muslim once. So you may say that Obama, now let's go back to Obama. Obama says one thing I want to make sure, don't try to jam anything through until Scott Brown is seated. That's all well and good. That's because he's a brilliant politician. But meanwhile, we still have his minions sequestered throughout the military, throughout the intelligence agencies, throughout every department in the country. We have Sunstein, the far-left radical who would like to infiltrate those who disagree with him, infiltrate people, something out of Eastern Germany that the Stasi did. So what's the good of saying Obama's clever and he's moving to the center if he is still stuck with this far-left, Stasi-like administration that he put in place? We're stuck with it. Now, let's go back to this one. The New York Times last night wrote the article about Brown, and they said that he supports waterboarding, deporting illegals, and no cap and trade. I agree with all of that, by the way. I'd love to see each one of those particular pieces of legislation brought up for a vote. I would like to see Khalid Sheikh Mohammed waterboarded on Times Square and put on pay-per-view as he admits what he did. I'd like to see a PPV on Khalid Sheikh Mohammed waterboarded on Times Square, with the money going to the defense of Lieutenant Behenna, who you well know I am championing on this show. Many of you have called and written. His mother said that Lieutenant Behenna received 18,000 emails the day that I broke the story on the show, I think on Monday, whenever I did, Friday rather. He received 18,000 visits to his website because of that one appearance on michaelsavage.com. So don't underestimate the power of this show or your power. And even if you can't send money, you can write the guy a letter telling him you support him. If you can send money, then go to michaelsavage.com and do so, and I'll forward it on to the mother, to her. She'll give it to the defense fund. I don't want anyone in between me and her. They've, mortgaged their house. What about deporting illegals? Now, you may say, did the illegals have anything to do with this election? You betcha. See, liberal Massachusetts is liberal Massachusetts, but it's a state filled with working people, and they hearken back to the days of the American Revolution. They don't like people BSing them. Yes, they're basically trade unionists, and they vote with labor, and they vote for Democrats, because that's the way the state has been for so long. But even they get angry once in a while, and they say, don't take us for granted. And they will elect a Republican from time to time if the Republican strikes the right chord with them. Now, one of the reasons they voted for Scott Brown was because they already have a state-mandated health plan that was passed by Governor Mitt Romney, a Republican, a middle-of-the-road Republican, by the way. And Mitt Romney's health plan has been a total and absolute disaster in Massachusetts. And they don't like it. The cost overruns were $2 billion. The medical care went down. The premiums went up. But here's the big one, folks. The health care plan that Romney put in place went to illegal aliens. They were able to get free medical care just as they are able to vote in Massachusetts, even though it's illegal, because Massachusetts refuses to require, that is, an ID at a polling place. Can you imagine showing up to a polling place and not having to produce an ID? Can you imagine any nation on earth functioning like that? No, you can't. That's why this nation's not functioning, because we have non-citizens voting in every election, which explains why you have Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein in California and Chuck Schumer in New York in power. You understand how it works? But let's go back to this. So the health plan in Massachusetts that was put in by Mitt Romney, unfortunately for the voters in Massachusetts who clamored to get health care, they found out after the fact that illegals were capitalizing on this, and the illegals got lots of free health care, as you know they do, because fundamentally it's human nature to take what you can get when there's no consequences. Just as the illegals in California have bankrupted the state, and Schwarzenegger doesn't have the political guts to say it, they bankrupted the state on many levels, mainly through the health care. Overcrowding the prison system, overcrowding the court system where they require translators. I was called as a juror not too long ago in California on a murder trial. Do you know that they had 2 translators for this scum? This vermin with the lizard skin boots. They're required to give him two Spanish translators. Can you believe this? This is what's going on. So it bankrupted the state, in other words. Now let's go back to Scott Brown. So in other words, Massachusetts is bankrupt for many reasons, not the least of which is the fact that illegals got health care for free, and the people didn't want that to happen. So they know what a mandated health care system does to a state. They have it. And so they threw out the old guard, and they brought in the new. Now, having said all of that as a prelude to what I'm going to say today, please, folks, please don't have too high an expectation for this fellow Brown, and I'll tell you why. A, he's just a man. B, he's a politician, and a very skilled one at that. He's been a state politician for 8 years, okay? Now, he's going to do things that you're not going to like. I can guarantee you're going to be extremely disappointed in Scott Brown. He may have said a lot of things during the campaign, just as Obama did.